2 years ago, Fortnite Reload was released, and I think even to this day, most people will confidently say that this is the definitive best mode to Battle Royale we have ever had. While yes, we have gotten other epic made modes like OG or Blitz, Reload has consistently performed the best since it was released. Now, as with any mode, Reload has had some highs and lows and like some very, very low lows. And because Fortnite Reload is turning 2 years old, I wanted to go back to where it all started and take a look at all the maps, loopholes, and generally what the player base was all like during its time on the game so far. If you go in to enjoy this video, consider subscribing. It helps out a lot and I would greatly appreciate it. And with that out the way, let's begin. On June 22nd, 2024, Epic released Fortnite Reload, and immediately it was a huge success, hitting numbers that were even outperforming the core Battle Royale mode, which doesn't really ever happen. And what was super notable about Reload is that it had literally almost no build-up. There was no tweets, tweezers, or even leaks, or anything that was suggesting that this was happening. One day, we just woke up and Fortnite said, hey, yeah, new game mode is dropping tomorrow, see you there, and casually just showed a teaser of a rift in the sky. Now, instantly, people were freaking out, understandably, about what this could be. But taking a closer look at this teaser, it looked eerily similar to Chapter 1, like almost too similar in a sense. And this was supported even further by the teasers that followed up, which showed OG POIs like Tilted Towers, Pleasant Park, and a miniature version of Loot Lake. And soon after, the game mode went live. And despite being a side mode that had very little build-up and was made in literally less than a month, it almost instantly cracked over 1 million concurrent players at a time for nearly a week straight after it dropped, which was, in hindsight, a big deal because Battle Royale around this time was hovering at around 300,000 players during peak hours. And since this mode was released during a sort of controversial season, a lot of players who were sick of the current state and formula of Battle Royale also flocked over to Reload, which just further enhanced its player base. Hell, you can see a dip in Battle Royale players around the time Reload was released. Now, what made Reload so good? Why did it get so popular so fast? Well, the main one was the fact that the state of Battle Royale back then was, it was terrible. But aside from that, it worked very differently from Battle Royale or anything we have seen up until that point. How the mode works is that it starts with 40 players on a very small map, and if you die, as long as one member of your team is still alive, you will respawn until the late game where reboots are disabled. The respawn mechanic alone made this game mode 10 times more fast-paced and addicting than Battle Royale was at the time. Because in Battle Royale, you would have maybe less than 10 fights on average throughout the entire 20-minute match, a lot of those being AI, but in Reload, you could get dozens of fights within a 15-minute or shorter time window. Combine this with the fact that the loophole was simple and not filled with BS items or guns, and pretty solid mobility overall, and the fact that bots didn't really exist was just like the perfect recipe for a new mode. That first week of Reload was some of the most fun I've had playing Fortnite during the entirety of Chapter 5, if not the most fun I've had. And in my opinion, it single-handedly carried Chapter 5. I actually think that if it wasn't for Reload, Chapter 5 would not have a following like it does today. And since there was no bots, games were not easy by any means. They were fast-paced, they were super sweaty, so winning was not an easy feat, which actually made wins feel super hype when it actually did happen, which is what players have been begging for so long. Oh, you've got to be kidding. Okay, I think bots aren't actually the worst thing ever, but not even 2 days after the mode went live, bots started to slowly roll out into Reload. And people, including myself, were not the most thrilled about this change. Part of the reason why Reload was so enjoyable in the first place was the fact that each fight was against another real person for the most part. Now, I will say this, at least compared to the other modes, Reload's bot problem is the least severe. Like in Battle Royale, like half of the lobby is AI, and in OG and Blitz is even worse, especially when it comes to ranked play. But the fact they still exist to begin with just put a bad taste in everyone's mouths, including mine. Like, I just don't think they belong in Reload. But aside from the bots problem, Reload was still super fun, and this mode is actually the reason why Chapter 5 Season 3 is one of my most played seasons ever. I think I got like over 300 crown wins, and this was the first and only time, if I'm being real, that me and my buddies actually grinded to Unreal in this season, so that was notable, I guess. guess. And there were some really powerful mythics in there as well, but they made them like super rare, so if you actually did get them, you know, you'd be pretty excited to use them because, you know, they're not easy to get. And it also helps that during this time when Venture was the only map, the loophole was changing almost every single month to keep things fresh. This is especially true as on July 16th, they vaulted some of the really bad guns that were hardly used and added the Thunder Shotgun and the Twin Mag SMG, which just further enhanced an already amazing loophole. I mean, just look at this, it's beautiful. Now, I'm not going to talk about every single loophole or every single hotfix because that would just take literal hours, but I am going to highlight the notable ones. Speaking of which, on November 2nd, 2024, Reload released its first ever major update. This brought solos to the mode, which actually worked very differently to team modes, where you would have a set amount of reboots to start with, and if you have any lives when reboots get turned off, they would be converted into overshield. Now, me personally, I do think they could have handled this a bit better, as I really wish there was a way you could earn back reboots, like maybe after getting a few kills, you would gain an extra life. But overall, it was still super fun and convenient, as up until now, you needed friends or played with randoms, which never pans out well. We also got a completely new loophole, which now included mostly chapter 3 and chapter 4 weapons like the Thunder and Maven, and also added the infamous overclocked pulse rifle as a mythic drop. However, it was not perfect. The ARs were probably the biggest problems with this loophole in my opinion. Like, we got the Flapjack, Ranger, and Havoc suppressed rifle, which all of these were awful. The loophole for me was just okay, but obviously the biggest highlight of this update was the Oasis map. Now, I know this map is considered 50-50 by most. A lot of people love it and a lot of people really hate it. Now, me personally, I'm actually in the boat of actually really liking this map. The fact we got an entire new map themed around the desert biome from chapter 1 with Paradise Palms being the main drop spot was such a good time. Do I like it more than Venture? Honestly, not really. The main problem with Oasis, in my opinion, is that it just had too many mountains that are just way too high up, and especially with zero builds, which I am a zero builds player, are just not possible to get up to unless you have a rift or a grappler. But overall, Reload was still very much thriving, still consistently keeping up with the core battle royale modes, and for the most part, it was even surpassing it at some times. This is also where ranked really started to take off and was consistently getting more players in actual casual play, which was almost never the case with the core battle royale modes where ranked was pretty dead. Hell, ranked Reload at some points were outperforming battle royale pubs just on its own. I think it's just because Reload ranked just works a lot better than Battle Royale ranked, and Reload is just a sweatier game mode just objectively. Hell, I grinded to Unreal with my friends around this time, and it was an amazing experience. Did we get slapped around for the majority of it? Yeah, but at least it was better than Battle Royale ranked. In that game mode, everyone is hiding and running, and nobody really wants to fight, but in Reload, it seemed like everyone wants to throw hands, and I was all for it. And the very few games where me and my friends actually won games when we were in elite or champion lobbies were probably some of the most hype and just intense games I will ever have, I will tell you, man. Because unlike Battle Royale, where ranked isn't very different from pubs and how it plays and still ends with 4 or less teams in the endgame, in Reload ranked, however, especially when it comes to the later ranks, the majority of your endgames will end with all 40 players still alive. And these matches actually just felt like whole ass war zones, and it was super fun. And this is actually where I'd say the golden era of Fortnite Reload happened. I was putting in more hours in Fortnite Reload in just a few weeks than entire seasons combined prior to this. And it felt like Reload was unstoppable. Like, surely it couldn't get bad. Surely, right. The Slurp Rush Reload map was released on April 15th, 2025. Quite the gap, I must say, but still, a new map is a new map, so I'm not complaining, for now at least. And I think almost everyone could agree this was the weakest Reload map so far. In my opinion, it's not a bad map per se, like there is Slurp everywhere so you will never lose games due to lacking heals. But the way this map was made and the way it's structured is just very weird. Like, it was a little hard to describe why it felt weird, but maybe it's because the terrain is just too varied, it's too elevated. Oasis had some problems with this, being the hills being impossible to get on without external help, especially when it came to zero build. But in Slurp Rush, the terrain was just too rough in a way, and there was noticeably a lot more bushes on the map, which just isn't a good thing for a mode like Reload, which is trying to encourage aggressive playstyles rather than, deter from it. This update also brought one of the weaker loot pools we have seen generally when it comes to the loot pools we have gotten so far, which have been pretty okay to really, really good. Now, I don't think there was a single defined loot pool from the start to now that was actually super bad in my opinion, but this one was definitely one of the weakest when it came to its changes. Most of the guns just felt too weak or too situational. It wasn't all bad, don't get it twisted. Like the Red Eye assault rifle got unvaulted, which is one of my all-time favorite assault rifles, and they re-added the Chug Jug, which with the most recent rework to heals, that the fact that you can use a set amount of them and move at the same time, Chug Jugs were actually very viable to carry, especially in Reload. And also they unvaulted a lot of really good guns like the Infantry, Hammer, Thunder, and Mammoth all in the same patch. And since I am the biggest Mammoth pistol glazer there is, well, maybe except for Zemi, but you get what I mean, I was not complaining at all. However, they vaulted the Flowberry Fizz, Shield Keg, and all of these slap items. Me personally, I thought this was very unnecessary. The Flowberry Fizz was one of, if not the most useful heal and mobility item in the entire game that you could carry, because not only did it benefit yourself, but it also benefited your whole team by giving them low gravity and providing good healing. And this also applies to the Shield Keg. I just don't get why they removed it. And Slap was just always useful. Reload around this time was pretty weird because after this, we wouldn't get any real big changes to Reload for a while. Yeah, there was some tiny vaults and unvaults, but pretty much all of them didn't really shake up the meta in a meaningful way, so they were just kind of just whatever. So the fact that the map was just kind of underwhelming with a meta that was barely changing, a lot of players, including myself, were experiencing a little bit of burnout from Reload. However, it wouldn't be the lowest point it had. Not even close. Overall, a period of Reload was just kind of mid. It was not objectively bad, but things were starting to get a little stale. And while the mobility, while still consistent, was pretty much never changed, it was still simply grapplers and shockwaves. Yes, we did have a period where the Kinetic Blade came back for a little bit, but that was pretty much it for mobility meta changes. Don't get me wrong, I love both of these items, but since Reload is a side mode, I was a little disappointed they weren't experimenting more with, different kinds of mobility. It wouldn't be until June 18th until we finally saw another noticeable change to its loophole, and again, it wasn't received very well. For one, they brought back the Charge Shotgun. Now, I will say this, I think the Charge Shotgun is overhated, but for a game mode like Reload, I just don't think it works all too well, especially when there are other shotguns that are in the current loophole that are just better to choose. So why would you ever choose the Charged Shotgun? There's just better options. It just made finding the actual good shotguns just way harder to find for some reason. And we also got some very useless unvaults, like the combat pistol and hand cannon got unvaulted. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know a single person who asked, yeah, I want the combat pistol back. I don't think a person has ever said that. If you have actually said that, let me know in the comments. Seriously, we couldn't get any other weapon, not any good ARs, not any good shotguns, hell, not even a good pistol. We got the combat pistol. What? However, there was a saving grace. The Flowberry Fizz made a return. So that was neat, which did help Reload's pacing a lot, but even after this change, I just didn't really find a reason to play Reload in its current state. Battle Royale around this time was actually not half bad, so Reload just couldn't really keep up with it in my opinion. So for a while, I just quit. I did play here and there, but it was far less than it used to be just months prior. Now, Reload was actually still holding a solid following during this time, consistently hitting over 100,000 players during peak hours, but just looking at the graph, you can see how hard it dropped in September and October, but around the time Oasis came out, it actually spiked up again, but then after that, it really wouldn't see these numbers ever again. And of course, Ranked Reload was by far the most popular mode, so literally nothing changed there, but things were getting a little rough and they needed to add a new map to win back players. So about that. On June 27th, 2025, we got a brand new map, but it was different this time because instead of the map being themed around something that already existed, like Venture being themed around Chapter 1, Slurp Rush being themed around Chapter 2, and Oasis being themed around Paradise Palms, this was actually a Squid Games collab map. And as you could tell, it looked a little bigger than the other maps, like noticeably bigger. And that is precisely why I consider this be the absolute lowest point in Reload history ever. This map was genuinely awful, and in my opinion, unplayable, at least in zero build. I think its only redeeming quality is the cool minigames you can get at certain POIs to get guaranteed mythic guns. That was pretty cool. But even then, this map just did not work for Reload. Games felt way too slow. There was way too many bushes. Like, combined with the fact that the terrain was already curved similar to how Chapter 5 did it, this just made it for like possibly the rattiest playstyles imaginable, as all players would do is just hide in bushes the entire game, or just get on top of a tree and just shoot down. That's not fun. That's just super slow, ratty playstyles. The map is bad. We got that straight. Now let's look at the loot pool. What did they add on the day the new map was going live? You want to know what they changed? They vaulted the jetpack. I'm not kidding. We got a brand new map and all they did was vault the jetpack, a useless item. I don't even have the words, to be honest. And nothing else would change for another month where they finally made some changes. Now, credit where credit is due, they did unvault some good stuff, like the Slap Splash made a return and the infantry were pretty big additions, but the rest didn't really change or matter. If anything, the rest just cluttered an already messy loot pool, and they vaulted the Chug Splash. Just thanks, Fortnite. We really needed that in this time of Reload. And you want to know something else funny? They vaulted the Thunder and Ranger shotgun, which both are incredible fan favorite guns. And you want to know what they replaced them with? The lever action shotgun, aka the worst shotgun ever made. Whoever made this change never let them in the balancing department ever again. Who let bro cook? This was the worst change I have ever seen. Like, who thought this was a good idea? Who asked? Playing Reload around this time was borderline unplayable, in my opinion. Like, I hardly played for this very reason, and also the player count kind of shows this as well. During the time the Squid Game map was in rotation, Reload did experience a noticeable drop in players, dropping all the way down to 75k players in builds and 88k in builds ranked. Now, don't get it twisted, these aren't bad numbers by any means, but it is a noticeable drop from its former 1 million to 300k to 100k and now this. And I know I said this already, but this time in Fortnite Reload was super rough for a lot of people, including me. Hell, people and streamers who only exclusively played Reload was starting to branch off for a time to play OG or even Battle Royale. It wasn't until September 6th until finally a good loophole change was made, in my opinion. For one, they unvaulted the OXR and Spire rifle as well as the other base ARs, which made for a very healthy AR meta, in my opinion. And they unvaulted the pump, tac, and gatekeeper shotguns, all of which are super reliable. The only bad change about this loophole change is the rocket launcher came back, but honestly, the other changes are so good, I don't think this really matters. And them unvaulting yet again the combat pistol, like just why? Just oh my gosh. But then 9 days later, Fortnite saw this loophole and said, yo, that loophole, this is pretty good. Let's ruin it. And proceeded to vault the Crash Pad Jr. What the fuck? They removed the Crash Pad Jr. This was a huge deal, as this was one of the most useful and versatile mobility items in the entire mode. This was easily the most controversial change to Reload we have gotten in quite a while, so much so that the Crash Pad Jr. would be added back not even 20 days later. Oh, and just to add insult to injury, 3 days after they vaulted the Crash Pad Jr., they unvaulted the damn Boogie Bomb. Summed up, zero build players during this time were pretty miserable, but it wouldn't stay like this for very long. The lords have awakened and they have answered our prayers. We got a brand new map called the Nightmare Island on October 10th, 2025. And unlike the last two maps, which were mid to just damn near unplayable, this map was actually fire. So much so that I would consider this probably one of the best Reload maps we have ever gotten. It was about as big as Oasis in my opinion, so the pacing wasn't all screwed up. And while the initial loophole wasn't like amazing or anything, it did do two very huge things. For one, they vaulted the Mammoth Pistol and they added the Witch Broom and Crashpad Jr. back. Don't get me wrong, I love the Mammoth Pistol, but that thing is disgusting in Reload. And we got two great mobility items back. Now the initial weapons, as said, weren't amazing. They added like all of the sideway weapons, which I don't think anybody really asked for. But 14 days later on the 24th, they actually made a huge change to the loophole. They had the Thunder and the Havoc shotgun in the same loophole. I don't care what anyone says, when the Thunder and Havoc shotgun are in the same loophole, it makes for probably like one of, if not the best shotgun loopholes we will ever have. We also got the Infantry, Red Eye, and Striker Burst all back, which were also incredible. And of course, the Mammoth Pistol came back because, well, player backlash. Now, this is what I'm talking about. This was a great time to play in Reload. The map was actually good and the loophole felt really solid. Granted, this change only lasted about a week, then it got reverted, but I almost didn't really mind, to be honest, because I played almost exclusively Reload during that time period. If you didn't play during this time or didn't give Reload a chance, you missed out on one of the best eras of Reload, that's all I'm saying. Fast forward a bit, and I guess they couldn't make up their minds about the sideways weapons because they got vaulted and unvaulted and vaulted again, unvaulted like 4 different times before finally saying vaulted, which was probably for the best. Those guns suck. And on to November 12th, where certain maps for the first time had exclusive items added. In Venture, you can get the Flintlock Pistol, Balloons, Rift to Goes, the Jetpacks, and the Double Barrel Shotgun. In Oasis, you can get the Boom Bolt, Heavy Impact Sniper Rifle, Explosive Repeater Rifle, and Nitro Fist, and the 6-shooter. And on the Slurp Rush map, you can get the Slurp Juice, Dual Pistols, Fishing Rod, because of course, Chug Splashes, and the Charged Shotgun. While most of these changes weren't very impactful in my opinion, I do think it helped a lot when it came to the replayability and, you know, helping differentiate the maps. So I do think it was just overall a net positive for the mode, except Oasis though, because what on earth were they thinking bringing the Nitro Fist back? And only 3 days later on the 15th, we got perhaps one of the biggest announcement to reloads we've had in a very long time, which was Modifier Madness. This event would add exclusive LTM-like elements to each map in rotation from the 15th to the 29th. Now for Venture, it was the Floor is Lava, which was sadly only in builds, but I kind of understand why. I don't know how that would work in zero build. In Oasis, it was pretty much just steady storms, so that meant the storm pretty much just never stopped moving, and thus making games shorter. And Slurp Rush had Overflow, which every body of water would heal you, and yeah, it's as lame as it sounded. Apart from Venture's Floor is Lava, this really didn't do a whole lot to how it was played. I mean, yeah, they were cool, and they did bring the player base up by quite a bit, but I do think they were pretty cool for being a limited time thing, and I'm hoping they do this again, but really make it more game changing this time, because this on paper was a really cool idea to bring LTM elements into Reload. I just think they didn't really execute it that well, especially on Oasis and Slurp Rush, because wow, Slurp Rush specifically was so lame. You could barely notice a difference, if any at all. But regardless, Reload was starting to take shape again, and I was playing more and more of Reload than Battle Royale. So you know what that means. It's time to ruin it. Fast forward to December 4th, and we got yet again another new map to launch aside Fortnite Chapter 7 Season 1. Surf City was... yeah, it was not it, I'm sorry. Dude, look how big this map is. Is this Reload or just Battle Royale, man? Like, what is this? Make up your mind, Epic. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think Squid Grounds is much worse, but this is still not great. And also, you know how Reload's main selling point was that its loophole was meant to be different in every way and use guns vaulted in Battle Royale? Yeah, they took that whole thing and took it behind the barn. We got the Wingsuit, Twin Hammer shotguns, and the Arc Lightning gun, all of which I hate. and do not work in Reload whatsoever. We did also get the new Deadeye assault rifle, which actually does work in Reload quite a bit, but again, these guns are currently in Battle Royale. They are new guns that are exclusive to Battle Royale, so why would you bring it over to Reload? It really felt like Reload and Battle Royale around this time felt very similar, which was just not a good thing. They were meant to be separate to begin with. We didn't have to endure this for very long, thankfully, as on the 11th, we got the addition of the Morphite weapons. Now, this actually did really help Reload in my opinion, as before, I've said this for years, but the idea of the initial chrome weapons of, dealing more damage would increase the rarity, that was a great idea in my opinion, and I was really praying they would bring it back at some point, but at one point, I just kind of gave up on the idea. I didn't think they would ever re-experiment with it again, but I'd be damned. They actually did bring it back with the Morphite weapons. However, instead of the chrome weapons were just, really, really bad, these weapons actually were pretty good. And especially in a game mode like Reload where you are constantly getting in fights and getting a lot of damage in, you are encouraged to play aggressive to upgrade your loot and hence do better. This is where Reload really started to turn back around for me again. Seriously, these guns carried this Reload map so hard. We also got some new exotics, but these didn't really last too long, so it's not really worth mentioning. However, moving on to December 18th, we got probably one of the biggest changes to mythics and exotics this mode has ever gotten, as nearly every mythic and exotic in the loot pool was vaulted. I'm not sure what remained, if anything, but this was a big deal, as part of Reload's thrill was finding these super overpowered guns. But apart from that, Reload was still super fun for the majority of Season 1, with the Morphites coming in and out, which was annoying, but they did add more Morphite weapons to compensate for it, so it wasn't actually that bad. Moving forward to February 19th, 2026, we actually got a change to Reload, which was Teams of 8 to celebrate the Lantern Fest event. This, on paper, was a really cool idea. 8 teams sounded super fun, but oh my gosh, they had one job. They had such a great idea and ruined it so bad. For one, Teams of 8 was the only option to play Reload during this time. This made literally no sense in my opinion. If they just gave us the option to toggle on Teams of 8, or if you just wanted to play with your friends or something, but no, you don't even have the option of playing solo or with your friends. This wouldn't have been a problem if you just wanted to play Reload this time, but you were forced to play with 7 other people. And the second reason was probably the biggest problem. Only 3, yes, 3, not the other 7, were marked on your map. The other 4 teammates had very, very small indicators on where they actually were. Like, so small you could barely notice it. And since you couldn't even see their names highlighted or even their health bars, this led to teams just spreading out thin because nobody knew where each other was. Seriously, how do you mess up a mode like this bad? I played one game of this just to test it out, and afterwards, I quit Reload until it left, because this was one of the worst executed additions Reload has ever gotten, and I'm not exaggerating. And nothing really notable happened after this. Overall, Surf City was just okay. The loopholes were actually pretty solid overall, but this map was just bad, man. It wasn't as bad as Squid Grounds, as I said, but yeah, I know maps rotate and all, and this still meant you had a 33% chance to get this in your games, but even then, like, dude, I just don't get it. It just felt too big, too cluttered, and it just felt way too similar to Battle Royale with all the new guns being in it, which Reload wasn't designed for. Not the worst Reload has been, but definitely not close to its peak. Now let's talk about the most recent map added to Reload, aka Elite Stronghold, that was added on April 20th of this year. And yet again, this map just isn't very good. The loophole was actually pretty tolerable. We had a nerf version of the Hollow Twister, which was actually bullet drop, so it wasn't overpowered. And we got the Morphite Pump and Chaos Reloader Shotgun in the same loophole. But alongside that, we also got the Wrecker Revolver, which, yes, it is admittedly a fun weapon, but this thing is busted, let's be real. It should not be in Reload. Remember how I said Oasis's biggest problem was that there was a few mountains on the map that were just completely impossible to scale if you lacked mobility? They took that that and times it by 100. Because look at the amount of mountains and low ravines that are on this map. Again, I don't think it's as bad as Squid Grounds, but it's definitely my second least favorite map. And most of the POIs are just lacking. There are a few spots I actually really like, but the majority of the map just wasn't handled or executed that well. And 8 days later, they vaulted the grappler and replaced it with the grapple blade. Now granted, this was because grapplers were being super buggy around this time and they re-added it a few days later, but this caused an insane amount of outrage. Oh, also, Fortnite, just 1-to-1 here. Out of every mobility item, you chose the grapple blade? Nothing else? I could name like 10 other mobility items that would be way better than the grapple blade. Just whatever, we're moving on. 3 days later, we got more stuff added, like the grappler returned, of course, and the most notable stuff was the 7 power gloves, which were great for Reload in my opinion, and the slap pizza, which was also super nice. Now, I know these are also in the Battle Royale season, but honestly, I do think they worked really well in Reload, and I don't think they inhibited how it worked. And plus, we also had a lot of Volta stuff alongside it, so I don't think it was like as bad this time around. And the slap pizza was just also super nice, which leads us to present day. I do think even now, Reload is still by far the best and most cared for side mode compared to the other modes, which some of those I'm pretty sure were just left to rot and die. Ballistic. But 2 years later, does Reload still hold up and is it still fun? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it had its lows, but I do think the majority of Reload's lifespan has been pretty enjoyable so far. And I think if they lock in and make the next Reload map, as small as Venture and not as elevated as Elite Stronghold, I seriously think they could pull in a lot more players. Right now, Reload is still getting over 100,000 players consistently, and while it struggles to keep up with Battle Royale nowadays, at least until ranked resets, which for Reload, I don't know why it does this, but when ranked resets, Reload explodes in popularity, like way more than you might think. It's pretty obvious this is Fortnite's most successful side mode, and I'm looking forward to see what they have planned for it in the future. Unless they add a new map that's like the size of Chapter 6, because if that happens, we are all quitting.